Senator, is it a given in your line of work that anyone has a leg up? Do debate champions in high school or college, are lawyers better equipped for a night like tonight because of standing in a courtroom and making an oral argument?
Well, courtroom lawyers probably have a little bit of an advantage because when you're in a courtroom, you do have to think on your feet. You can't, there's nothing canned about the give and take between witnesses and opposing counsel and even how you interact with a jury. But let me just say this. I think you're right about the policy stuff. But what these folks really need to do is make an impression on people. A bunch of these folks are done after this week because, the bar gets higher for the next debate. It's not or so many donors or 1% in the poll. It's twice as many donors and 2% in the poll. So at least half of the people we're going to see over the next two nights won't be around for the next debate. So how do they rise to the level of making that impression and maintain that spontaneity you talked about? Because if they try to force it, it will be an epic failure.
That's exactly right. Because if they try, if everybody watching says, boy, they're really trying to make an impression.
Right.
That's
right.
not,
Right.
that's not a good thing.
You
can't seem to be trying to make an impression. You have to seem to be authentic, yes, spontaneous, but also you have to seem like you could stand up against Donald Trump. You have to seem like you could stand next to Donald Trump in a debate setting and give better than you get. And that's what I think a lot of
I think
people
you
are
wrote something that changed the equation. I mean, I think what you wrote yesterday about this is who we are, question mark.
Well,
I mean, the country and who we are after next election day is on the ballot. And I hear you on the policy stuff, but I think this is about more than just connecting and getting the priorities right. I think this is about saving the country. And I don't think and I think that's where the Democrats have the opportunity to reach across the aisle and grab the attention. We know Donald Trump's going to be watching. Republicans will be watching. And I think you put it perfectly in what you wrote yesterday. And I think Joe Biden so far has sort of branded his candidacy, if you will, with that message. This is about taking a 2x4 to the ugliest aspects of Trumpism, the racism, the misogyny. I mean, the three legs of Donald Trump's stool, the Access Hollywood tape came roaring back into the headlines with another accusation of assault. The Muslim ban was updated with the children being victimized by his immigration policies. Those aren't mistakes to the policy. That is the policy.
That is the policy.
That is the policy to penalize exactly. And taking the country to the brink of war with Iran. That was for kicks for the president last week. He was telegraphing the whole thing on Twitter. So this is about big stuff, and I don't think anyone put it better than you.
I think the other thing that is interesting about this debate is the hardest question to answer is the simplest. Why should you be president of the United States? There's 100 million people who are constitutionally eligible.
How are you going to beat Trump if 16 Republicans who were indisputably more qualified than him and indisputably have more character than him, and one Democrat who had more qualifications asleep than you have hopped up on caffeine? How are you going to do what none of them can do? How are you going to beat him?
And, remember, in the middle of the country, it's hard to forget how disgusted everybody is with Washington and the insiders. So this insider-outsider dynamic is going to be huge. Who can dress up, even if they're not an outsider, and convince people that somehow they can be a change agent? And part of that is how realistic is the promises they're making.
Exactly.
Because the American people have figured out now that, there's a lot of stuff people promise, and really getting 60 votes in the Senate and actually getting it done, that's a whole nother ballgame. So I think it's important that they actually focus on what can be done and not try to overpromise and not appear to be of Washington.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.